This is the final stop of drug trafficking. This is where the drug trade makes not millions, but billions of dollars. We started playing with the name. That's when we started buying. Is that when you started cleaning up?
Street, get out street. I'd better run.
Drugs suck all the money out. People with their own stories, relationships, and connections lived in this apartment. Everything has turned to junk. All the money has gone to the drug lords, who no longer know what to do with it. If they need a ship, they buy a ship. If they need a plane, they buy a plane. If they need a person, they bribe generals, ministers, and governors. To keep all of this going, they have hired killers, they have high-ranking patrons. If you seriously interfere with their business, then you are in great danger. Colonel Sergei Pelek spent 25 years putting the bosses of the drug mafia behind bars. He headed the 3rd Anti-Drug Department of the Investigative Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Before that, I worked in drug control. In 2022, he and his deputy Renat Kuramshin were dismissed. They know this world inside out. How the drug business is structured and who covers for it. How giant sums of money turn good people into criminals and risky businessmen into sponsors of drug trafficking. They investigated the most high-profile case of a record cocaine shipment to Europe, which is still shrouded in mystery. Their search turned out to be too successful, but today they can talk about it. In just one day, Moscow consumes 300 kilograms of drugs.
We were just checking the amount of drugs that were present at the moment to understand if a batch came in that we hadn't caught. The information is quite accessible on the dark web. I've done that more than once. I've seen it in my area. At one point, I counted up to 50 kilograms of drugs that were specifically hidden in stash spots. In the summer of 2018, we noticed that the price of cocaine started to drop.
In the year 2018, Russia hosted the prestigious FIFA World Cup tournament. On the streets of Russian cities, there are thousands of fans, many from Latin America.
The first version was that they brought in a lot of it under one pretext, because they were expecting many guests, or that more direct shipments had started.
During those days, at least 2 drug mafia bosses visited Russia. They entered through a simplified process. It was possible to cross the border and buy tickets with a fan ID. Fan ID.
One of the top managers, let's say, of the drug mafia flew into Moscow. He left Moscow for Sochi for a football match. He was walking down this very street at the time he arrived.
Such an opportunity comes once in a lifetime. Football matches were taking place in major cities across Russia, and under the guise of being a fan, you could travel around without drawing much attention, scouting new locations for drug deliveries.
Why is St. Petersburg also very important in this story? Because it's a convenient hub port, where you can not only go to the stadium, but also check out the port itself, for example, its location, how ships arrive, and how the traffic around the port works. So people did some sort of mini-scouting.
The personal data of the fans was protected. It was impossible to find out who flew together, who bought tickets nearby through the fan ID system.
At FIFA's request, the data obtained and processed through the fan ID was not shared with third parties, including, it turns out, law enforcement officers.
So, unnoticed by everyone, in the summer of 2018, the Colombian drug mafia prepared their breakthrough into the Russian market. In October, the St. Petersburg Customs learned that an unprecedented shipment was heading to the port. A 7-kilogram sample of cocaine.
To be honest, I've never come across samples like that before. Yes, because about 7 kilograms is for a sample. The highest quality is indeed a lot.
It was known that someone was going to pick up the cargo. A guest from Spain with the last name Sanchez will arrive. The buyer was a police agent. To arrest the guest, they initiated a complex operational game in St. Petersburg. A parallel reality was created around the guest. Everyone who surrounded him from the moment he arrived were undercover agents.
Almost completely. All the port employees, customs officers, police, drivers who transported, right down to the person who raised the barrier at the port, they were replaced by people who are involved in law enforcement.
Renat Kuramshin flew to St. Petersburg to lead the operation on site. They needed to find staff who would play the role of drug cartel gangsters.
There was a sort of casting. Let's say a person will meet with Sanchez, who will represent the criminal world, the Russian criminal world. The image needed to be, of course, respectable and trustworthy, so that it would be clear in his eyes that he was a representative of the major drug business in Russia. Of course, shopping trips or selecting the right look. I took part to elegantly tie a scarf on him. In one of the interrogations, Sanchez said that a very elegantly dressed man came to see him. I just marked it for myself, for my own personal reference, that I did my job in this regard. Sanchez himself went along with all these actions, which really surprised us. We thought he wouldn't go to the location, that one person would come for the drugs, another person would hand them over, and a third person would pass the money.
Sanchez flew to St. Petersburg in the early days of November 1918. At night, accompanied by fake drug dealers, he went to the port. Sanchez had photos of the required container on his phone, showing the locations where the drugs were hidden.
They already knew that these containers had been unloaded from this ship, right at this spot. We walked around the port. He looked, found the number, and said, "This is the container."
They're standing in rows.
Yes, they're in several rows. They are on top. They were marked, and that's it. But it turned out that it was on the first, so to speak, floor, this container.
Otherwise, he would have to climb up.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of factors at play here, of course. Very successful. This is rare. Rare cases exist. It went completely like that.
Sanchez showed where the cargo was hidden. They took the cocaine out of the container. The moment of payment arrived. Sanchez needed to be paid a large amount of cash. These were fake bills.
Just regular joke banknotes. Yeah, just regular joke banknotes. Because we understood that this would not happen in broad daylight. It would be at night. He was just given it, "Here's a brick like this." To which he made sure that it was something, looked normal, and felt right in weight, matching. The same kind of bills. He made sure everything was good. The deal went down at that moment. The arrest.
Sanchez was stunned when suddenly fighters from the special forces jumped out of the darkness and arrested him. About an hour later, Renat Kuramshin showed up to him, and he explained that for smuggling cocaine in particularly large quantities, he faced life imprisonment. Sanchez revealed everything he knew.
As Sanchez himself said, in 5 years we want to flood Russia with cocaine. The breakthrough was specifically from their side into the Russian market, not the European one. The European market has already been worked out. If this cartel succeeded, it would have taken that niche. It would be a cocaine pipeline, but directly from Latin America to Russia.
The wholesale price of drugs here. In the country, it was about $40,000 per kilogram. And Sanchez had already brought in 27. A discount? Very large. And he said, in case of an agreement, the price could drop to 23. Can you imagine there's just a system of intermediaries, suppliers, prices are set, boy, everything is ready. Once they jump over a large number of intermediaries and offer such a price that some are left without work.
No one wanted to be out of work. Probably someone from his own. And Sanchez turned in the law enforcement agencies. But he was just a courier. Who sent him? Sanchez, named his handler, but he only knew him by his nickname.
He called him Pedro. That's the name he at least told us.
The search for the real name took 6 months. They were desperately and unsuccessfully searching for this person through the Fun ID system at the World Cup.
He arrived just in time for the France-Belgium match. Again, was also registered as a guest of our country through Fun ID.
As far as I remember, he never actually went to the matches for which he bought tickets. So the person, did he come for the negotiations?
We spent a long time indeed trying to find his information. An extremely, really long time. Those who work succeed?
He was found through a hotel registration in St. Petersburg. His real name is Quiñones Francisco Javier Cortes. He was identified by an arrested drug courier from a photograph. There was nothing on him in the Russian databases. The citizen of Ecuador was living in Spain. They requested information from Spain, and there he was well known. Information came from there that Cortes was likely a drug dealer with 10 years of experience.
Got there. He had come under the radar of law enforcement, specifically as one of the participants in Latin American cartels for the organization of distribution and transit.
He was part of the Cali cartel, the famous one, that replaced the Escobar cartel. He lived in Spain.
Sanchez himself told how he met Cortes, how he, working as a driver forwarder, transported small batches of drugs up to 500 grams in his car on assignment for Cortes.
For example, in the port of Rotterdam or Hamburg, it doesn't matter. He calmly came for the same deliveries, freely, without any control, took out of the container everything he needed, took it away, handed it over. No one watched him.
Sanchez was used to the fact that no one bothered him in the ports of Europe. That is probably why he so easily went to the port of St. Petersburg to get the drugs and went to exchange the goods for money himself. Most likely that was how Cortes planned it. This ensured complete control over the shipment. According to the investigation, Cortes came to Russia in the summer of 2018, arranged for a drug shipment, and then returned to Spain. And he gave the order to his accomplices in Ecuador to load cocaine onto the ship heading to St. Petersburg.
Cortes, he's a member of the cartel. He is directly connected to specific suppliers. Who forms the cargo, who hides it in the container. And his argument is because the ship was coming from Ecuador. That's where banana boats usually come from. This is also the largest logistics center. Nothing goes directly from Colombia. That is, he was closer in the hierarchy to the upper management.
But perhaps not the very top.
Naturally, not the highest, because those people who occupy high positions, they never see and never touch the drug.
So could he have known these people?
He could have known these people, but he chose a different path, but in silence.
I hope you truly, completely, and fully understand my decision, because it is important to me.
At the request of Moscow, Spain arrested Cortes and extradited him to Russia. In December 2022, he was, sentenced to 17 years. He did not admit to being the organizer of the drug trafficking and refused to cooperate with the investigation.
I think that sooner or later he will want to cooperate after, as is usually the case, serving a sentence of 2 or 3 years. And when not only his family stops supporting him, but also his accomplices, they start writing off the accounts. In a year or two, we'll definitely see Cortes will raise his hand and say, I want to tell the whole story from beginning to end.
Could other participants at the same time have been more successful and pushed their product? Here,
it's a scary question, really, because we understand it ourselves and the statistics show it. And the UN Drug Commission always says the same thing. We see and can detain 10% of the traffic. Unfortunately, I'm a young investigator, and I ended up in the investigative department of the control lesson.
Our leader always said it like this: if you haven't reached the original source of the drug, that infamous plantation, consider your case unfinished. For 10 years, drug control has been investigating the transit of Afghan heroin in Russia, so all the links in the drug economy became clear. It was a real corporation. The dealers reported to the coordinators how much of the stuff they managed to sell, and then they placed pre-orders with the producers. It became clear who gets how much at each stage of the transshipment, how much it costs to open the border for drug traffickers, and who is the one that opens it. It turned out that this was done by a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Defense of Tajikistan.
The logistics centers located at the border concentrate this drug and sell it for $1,500 per kilogram. So, the cost of this route comes to $2,500 from Afghanistan to Tajikistan. This cost also included the share of the leader of the Ministry of Defense, who was responsible for the transportation. One minimum shipment that was transported across the Tajikistan border consisted of about 500 tons. You can calculate what share was left for the individuals who opened the window at the border. After several large seizures were made, the cost of transporting the drug rose to 2,500. Can you imagine, if you count like this, tons are being transported, the carrier only receives more than $1 million. The drug was supplied to the logistics center. Considering this entire scheme, in Moscow, it goes for $15,000 to $18,000 per kilogram. The minimum price of the drug that was on the market was why everyone, again, used this particular logistics center, specifically with this person who worked directly with the Afghans, producers who were overseen, by the way, by the Mujahideen.
The investigation concluded just like in a textbook. The investigators saw the very plantations where the drug trafficking began.
A field commander was identified, an Afghan field commander, along with specific plantations in Afghanistan, in a specific province of Afghanistan where this is located, and the factory where the initial processing takes place. I continued to act along this same path in my investigations.
This investigation made Renat Kuramshin banned from entering Tajikistan, but it was a small price to pay for success. On January 30th, 2019, in the Cape Verde Islands, the police detained the vessel SR and found almost 9 tons of cocaine on it. Vessel sailed Panama to Morocco. The crew was entirely made up of Russian citizens. All the sailors were arrested.
I was riding the subway, and they sent me a text message saying that, Seryoja, they need to talk to you. Because there is a big arrest where our citizens have been detained. 9 to 10 tons at that time was an absolute record in the world. I returned to duty and called my deputy to me. Kuramshina, Renata, what about Renat? What did he say? I'm tired of heroin, let's deal with cocaine. Because we always really enjoyed thoroughly investigating, and we were good at it.
At the same time, in an atmosphere of deep secrecy, a group called Mimina began interrogating the Russian sailors in Cape Verde. Under this nickname, the insiders knew 2 representatives of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration of the United States. Former citizens of the USSR who were once law enforcement officers worked as representatives of the DEA in Moscow and were based on the territory of the American embassy.
One is Georgian, the other is Armenian. It just happened so easily and freely. On the first try, Rena gave the book Mimina. They speak Russian with an accent like in the movies.
Well, they got attached to that nickname. It was sometimes mentioned in meetings that Mimina responded to our request regarding this, for example. Or you sent some information to Mimino?
The DEA agents, the collective Mimina, flew to Cape Verde just in time for the ship's arrest. How they found out about everything in advance is unknown. The captain of the ship later expressed outrage that representatives of the law enforcement agencies of Russia did not show up for the interrogation, and instead, some unclear people arrived. In fact, the Russian operational group, which did not include Pelika and Kuramshina, soon rushed to Cape Verde as well, but they were not allowed to see the sailors. Someone decided to withhold the investigation materials from Russia.
It was decided that the operatives would go to Cape Verde. We proposed our candidates accordingly with Renato. From Renat, according to that, our candidates, moreover, Renat knows English very well and has a decent level of Spanish, but they didn't send him. Our operatives went there and stood around and then came back.
A very heavyweight, a completely Russian team. There's something, naturally, for the FSB, this is also like a red flag that needs to be reacted to somehow. So let's say they tightly surrounded it in cooperation with the KBRD. The question is that initially the Russian group didn't receive the necessary information and had to just turn around and go home.
Meanwhile, Spain requested information about this case from Russia. What does Spain have to do with this? It looks strange. But apparently, the Spanish police also knew something about this setup. In Russia, almost nothing was known about this case. The investigation started from scratch.
The team is completely Russian. We got caught up in this because it's impossible to assemble a team that is completely Russian and for there to be no trace of it in Russia. Some kind of lead. We thought, we held a lot of meetings. We consulted with the prosecutor's office. We held discussions among ourselves. We thought about this topic for a long time and figured that something should come out of it. There's something here, and it turned out that we were right.
The captain and the entire team were from Murmansk. That's where the search began. At first, we were cautious, not interviewing relatives so as not to scare anyone off.
We received the official list of the team on paper, and we just, well, it's a standard tactic, a proper request. Banks, phone companies, insurance companies, social services, tax authorities, well, everything that's possible.
Where he lives, what he breathes, where he studied, where he got his qualifications, whether he's married, kids, where he worked, how he paid his taxes. You go with a big net.
And little by little, you start extracting some other value of information from it.
At the same time, requests were sent simultaneously to Spain and Cape Verde.
To fully understand, to know what kind of person he is, how he acts, what drives him, what his motives are. You understand that this trip was not easy, and that call was not easy either. You're starting to piece everything together into a coherent picture. The captain, some unclear trips, some unclear meetings. You analyze his flights, several trips to Moscow. For what purpose? Probably to meet with a potential employer. And the employer, and who is this employer?
The sailors couldn't just board that ship like that, so we need to find out who put them. Let's put it in quotes, on this ship. Who signed the contract with him, and all that sort of thing. Who negotiated with them, who was the initiator, who was looking for the crew, who found the captain.
These same questions were asked by the RTVI television film crew, who went to Murmansk in the month of February 2019 in search of that mysterious employer. We managed to talk to the relatives and colleagues of the sailors. They said that the crew was negotiated with in some cafes without leaving any traces. There was no company office, nothing at all. We were able to find the crewing company through which the crew was hired. But the head of the company said that the captain was the one who looked for the crew himself, and he just helped him with the paperwork. A standard set of documents before going on a voyage. Captain Sergei Kotlovsky, a respected person in the industry, has never been caught up in anything suspicious, but who reached out to the captain himself. No one knew anything about this. Finally, we managed to get a copy of the contract that the sailors signed. The employer was listed as some foreigner, as they said, a Spaniard. There were talks that the crew was hired by a Spanish firm. We did some digging and found out that the person whose signature was on the contract never crossed the border into Russia. Someone else was negotiating on his behalf, but who? Here, we couldn't make any progress. And that was the most important thing. The investigation was able to identify the person who hired the sailors for the cocaine voyage. And as soon as this mystery was unraveled, the information started pouring in like an avalanche. This person turned out to be a woman with Russian roots named Natalia.
We started pulling and tugging at these chains, at these threads. We found out that there is a very strong, let's say, Russian trace in this story. It's not like some foreigner just showed up.
What was Natasha doing?
Natasha introduced herself as a translator, and she also found the captain, explained the goals and objectives to him. The captain of the flight pulled up his friend Starmek, and the team was being pulled together by all three of these people.
But maybe Natalia really was just a translator. Maybe she was used in the dark. Now, the investigation began to revolve around her, and her connections were quickly discovered. So we got to her husband, a Spaniard, started investigating him, and we were just stunned.
There's a certain person, a native of Spain named Alexander, let's say. We identified him as a connection. Natasha, later it was established that he was her husband and that they had children together. As we dug a little deeper, it turned out that he had a very rich past, experience related to similar shipments of drugs. Well, at that point, we just clapped our hands. We found the one we needed. This is one of the top managers in European drug crime.
Alexander was not an ordinary businessman. His success in business came when he established connections with one of the 6 Mafia families in Galicia, which is famous for its centuries-old smuggling traditions.
Galicia, a province in Spain. The famous 6 Mafia. Clans, families, that have historically and traditionally been involved in the supply of cocaine from Latin America to Europe. Galicia is located in such a region of Spain that it can intercept the flow heading to Europe, specifically through Spain and up to northern Spain towards the Netherlands. We were taken through those places, those very coves where the last stage, the last mile of drug delivery usually happens. These rocky mini coves. Sparsely populated, covered with trees where there are practically no people. A very convenient way for smuggling supplies. Since the early 2010s, new information has emerged about the fact that there are submarines, homemade semi-submersible submarines, where they have a small cockpit above the water's surface, about 30 centimeters high, so they can just see where they're going. Logistics, for the most part, is set up quite simply, but that's it. You need to see, understand, and learn. A vessel of this kind, like a cargo ship or maybe a tanker, it comes from some country in South America, for example, from Ecuador or Panama. And in the free sea, in the free economic zone beyond 20 miles, it stops. And accordingly, several small boats arrive from the shore. There are 6 to 7 motors, high power, expensive and very modern, and one boat. It is approximately 7-8 meters long and about 3-4 meters wide. They can carry 1 to 2 tons of cocaine. Usually that's how the delivery looks. A vessel approaches the dock, and 3, 4, 5, or 6 boats arrive to it. Everything is quickly unloaded and swiftly taken to shore.
Now it's clear which group hired the Murmansk sailors for this trip. That was a good point. Supports. But the main fantastic discovery was yet to come. Investigators were able to uncover that Alejandro had already organized exactly the same drug shipment in the past. He didn't even bother changing the details of the scheme. Everything was exactly like later in Cape Verde. And the crew was also Russian.
A ship roughly like that from a Latin American country was heading towards Spain. And not far from the Canary Islands, he was detained by the police where they seized, I think, about 4 tons of cocaine. What caught our attention in this story? The captain is Russian. Again, several crew members are Russian. Another very interesting lead. The Russian captain is making arrangements with a native, probably from Spain, but living in the Canary Islands in Las Palmas, called him Colombian Pope. The captain had a direct agreement and connection with this Colombian Pope.
The Colombian Pope, quite an interesting. The individual convicted for similar drug shipments has serious authority in Latin America, including in Spain. If I remember correctly, he is a citizen of Spain and one of the Latin American countries. In that previous shipment, the drug cartel was fully exposed. After interrogating the sailors, the police tracked down Alejandro and the Colombian Pope and locked them up for a long time. The drug cartel didn't make that mistake again.
There were intercepted phone conversations, witness testimonies that he met with him several times. The captain spoke Spanish well and probably still does. So they were directly discussing that this would be a drug shipment. Out comes, accordingly, from this whole mass, the Colombian Pepa and our Alejandro, who is involved in this matter. Pepa is the best. Naturally, they were arrested and sentenced in Spain, I think to 13 years.
Natalia and Alejandro were already together. When her husband was imprisoned, Natalia tried to save his company's assets from seizure. The Spanish police issued a warrant for her arrest. To avoid arrest, Natalia hid in Russia and waited out the dangerous times there. While Alejandro was in prison, she ran a discreet but rather strange business in Russia related to container shipping.
We managed to thoroughly dig up and uncover the activities from which we saw that this activity is not typical, commercial, and they are initially before delivery. They were doing trial transactions, legal supply, legal payment for the delivery, testing the money transfer channel, moving money. The operation goes on without raising any suspicions from law enforcement. No one came for a search. It's fine.
Why do you think it was testing and not just regular financial or commercial operations?
No. To speak in official terms, there is no economic justification for the operation conducted. The goods supplied or not is something rare or unique to South America that would justify selling it from Russia in containers at an inflated price.
Goods talking about.
It was cebolla in Spanish, onion, just regular leek. The Manas variety, as far as I remember.
They were loading Russia and taking to Latin America?
Yes, that's absolutely right. The average price for exporting such onions abroad, not just to Latin America, but simply from Russia, at that time was about 30 to 40 euros. 30 to 40 cents, euro cents per kilogram. In this case, this product went for euros is in the 30 cents. So the price was inflated by 3 to 4 times. It's immediately clear that a cover deal. So, approximately 2 containers, $100,000, 100,000 euros. Guys, something's not right here.
Did they really haul this onion around for real?
Yes, they really physically dragged it. They tested the channel.
This mysterious activity continues until 2018, and in 2018, everything intensifies. The preparation for the cocaine flight to Cape Verde is starting, and just at that time, Alejandro and the Colombian Pope are getting out of prison.
We understand that it can't be a coincidence. At the same time, Alejandro and the Colombian Pope are released and activity begins. Immediately, some amounts start to pass between the participants, the figures, the trips are starting. In the experience, you see that some movement is starting.
They tracked him as soon as he got out. Out of prison, after serving another sentence, he settled in a luxurious house by the coast. And he immediately started making every effort to gather his team. To be more precise, he didn't start. He never lost it in connection. He just said it has to be done. Understand this correctly, this process. If you started engaging in this criminal activity even while sitting in prison, you don't stop. Especially in a position like the Colombian popes, you don't stop doing this.
Now, having identified the main actors, the Russian investigators were able to uncover dozens of secondary participants. The data was shared with the police in Spain. They confirmed there that all these individuals are listed in their databases as people involved in drug trafficking. They managed to reconstruct the entire chain of events and how the drugs got on board the ship. The sailors were starting a clean run. There was nothing criminal there yet.
We knew almost everything. So about 30 to 40 people were identified as part of this group. About 30 to 40 companies that were used, including for the legalization of funds. We accordingly made an assumption about the financing, the sources of funding, and the individuals who financed this shipment, and about the possible distribution of this drug across Europe, including our country.
The financiers of the criminal scheme. In 2018, the main drug supplier, the Colombian Pope, was involved in the operation.
The only thing he was missing was money for larger operations. And he found investors, both from Europe and from our country, who were loading such shipments and working.
If we're talking about this specific shipment to Cape Verde, who exactly invested in this particular shipment?
I won't name any names. This is both Russian citizens and European citizens.
This was the hardest revelation, that tons of cocaine were financed by investors from Russia. This revelation was not easy to come by, and it hit the investigators the hardest. We'll explain how the investigation came to these conclusions and why. 4 years after the arrest of the cocaine ship, the organizers of the shipment remain free, but the sailors are in prison. But to figure all this out, we first need to understand how the Russian drug trafficking system is structured. What is the connection between a ship registered in Panama that is transporting cocaine from Panama to Morocco and the Russian drug mafia? Direct. In the drug business, there are no state or language borders. A unified criminal space from Colombia to Vladivostok. And it so happens that the European part of drug trafficking from Spain to Russia is controlled by people from the former USSR.
Currently, there is a trial currently underway against the Moldovan thief-in-law, Tarkunov. What he is being tried for now is extortion. The theft from banks through explosions, and in the end, that's 2 10 pieces. Number 1, which directly concerns those with the status of thieves-in-law and authorities. So we sent him off with this bouquet. As of today, we haven't linked him to drug-related charges, yes, but all the information is available in the criminal cases. These are footage from the courtroom.
During the trial, Andrei Tarkunov was removed from participating in the court sessions because he was behaving aggressively.
The Moldovan thief-in-law was supposed to oversee all ethnic Moldovans in Moscow and the Moscow region. They brought him a share of the loot. Criminal world calls it a Basaitsky push. At some point, we noticed that, well, this was probably, in fact, in 2016, when Moldovan criminal groups, they practically took full control of hashish and cocaine in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Moldovan groups were charging straight towards their goal. They just took what they needed. They were robbing wealthy mansions in Rubliovka, targeting officials, businessmen, and even criminal authorities. They tied up the security. The owners were beaten to near death with crowbars and brass knuckles.
Moldovan criminal groups were attacking absolutely everyone, especially regarding robberies at homes, apartments. There was no for them. The word no or anything like that. They handled it successfully. With any security, with any resistance they had in their crews. There are a lot of champions with belts, especially when there are several of them, and with such experience. There was even an episode about a very respected in the criminal world. When the robbers came in, he said, "I won't mention your last name, no need for that." He said to the investigators, "You know who I am. I know." And right then they beat him up. And most importantly, they didn't get a response. Well, then they are a bit stronger at the moment.
It was precisely these qualities that allowed the Tarkhanov gang to take control of the entire western route for drug trafficking into Russia. Ten years ago, the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs noticed that there were many representatives of organized crime from Moldova involved in drug trafficking.
We had a group of individuals in the market originating from Moldova who were exclusively involved during that time. The organization of hashish distribution, they started to work on and to investigate, to intercept the drug shipments, which were mainly produced by residents of Moldova. And gradually, one by one, we reached managers and their teams of this criminal group. These leaders were also serious people, including politicians. We reached out specifically to Spain, and not just to Spain, but to the coast of Spain in Andalusia, where they had the most contacts with the military. Just like them, the Spaniards talked to criminal families.
Spain had started tracking Moldovan groups in drug trafficking even earlier and made significant progress in this area. Spanish colleagues sent a dossier to Russia, which outlined the main players and their roles. Turkunov was given a central role in this dossier.
In this report, they included a lot of interesting information, and it was the first time I saw it. In particular, they reported the leadership of this criminal group to a certain thief-in-law, Turkunov.
Besides Turkunov, Spaniards were aware of another person.
Yes, indeed. Not only besides Turkunov, the Spaniards were also cognizant of Oleg Prutian, who was identified by them as Turkunov's subordinate as well. We proved that it wasn't quite like that. Prutian was above Turkunova.
Oleg Prutian, also known as Borman, his older brother. In the early 2000s, they were robbing in Europe, and there they received their first prison sentences.
They took over the entire low-level drug distribution market, robbery, and everything else, pushing out the Italian Mafia. They established themselves in Italy, but as the Italians started to slowly close in on them, they moved west to Spain and Portugal and continued doing the same thing. In Portugal, Borman was arrested.
According to operational data, while in prison, Borman made acquaintances with Spanish drug traffickers. When he got out of prison, he already had a business plan ready. A business plan for developing drug trafficking in Europe.
At first, he had a dozen people who traveled, maybe once a month, transporting a batch at the very beginning of 10, maximum 15 kilograms. Then it gradually manifested, not all at once, gradually into caravans of transporters.
Borman was known as a ruthless person. He left no chances for his competitors. If they didn't agree to work for him, they simply disappeared.
Either you're with me and work for me, and it'll be beneficial for you to work with me. Otherwise, you're nobody. And in some situations, no one ever... And we see that in the initial period, he initially had a single crew, but a little later, it was another one. And some of these... The people who disappeared from his group also vanished completely from sight. And the relatives of these people were told that they were missing. So, as they say in the police, they're missing persons. Well, to say that, well, they're gone. We can't prove otherwise, but that's how it is. And everyone knows about it.
Gradually, Borman built an unprecedented drug supply network in Europe. Routes in all directions. Center, north, south. Elaborate cover documents. A whole fleet of cars with hidden compartments. The turnover increased exponentially, and along with them, his power grew. It got where they began looking for a union with him. Political figures, and this was truly dangerous. This is what the international supply network looked like, into which Bormann's group was integrated.
The first point is, generally speaking, where the farmers work. They sell their maximum yield for $1 per gram. The second point is where the farmers deliver their produce. At this point already, a sufficiently processed product that is basically ready for consumption. In this case, the price increases from $3 to $4 per gram. After that, the most interesting stages begin. At these points, international criminal groups get involved, transporting the goods to a logistics center, a major hub, and then they are distributed in bulk based on pre-orders. To criminal groups the Bormann criminal organization was conceived exclusively here. At the very final stage, obtaining drugs in the territory of the Russian Federation, he initially got a contact who was smuggling drugs across the border of the Russian Federation. Next, Bormann came up with an even deeper scheme. The Spanish coast, especially the western part, is divided among groups, and he realized that he would be sourcing from the coast. Drugs are much cheaper than if you were to look for them as a wholesaler through other sources. Naturally, the price comes with a discount because this distribution scheme included the gigantic region, which is Eastern Europe, including Russia. There are many consumers, so the amount of harvest now needs to be increased. Not only that, after this scheme was tested, Bormann decided, in my opinion, it's quite an interesting solution. He decided to brand his drug so that consumers would associate it with a certain quality and accordingly a certain price. He orders a brand for his drug with a euro sign. He was buying up huge batches, and he practically had no competitors in terms of price. By 2017, Bormann probably, notably, its structural organization. He absorbed all the major groups that had their own channels. Drug supplies.
The drug mafia bosses are not the kind of people you can catch red-handed with a load of drugs. To get to them, you'll have to work with the lower tier. These are the couriers, the transporters. It was they who provided the first snippets of information that ultimately allowed us to uncover the entire European network.
There are people who know what they are transporting. The transporters, they understand what to do, but these are some real artists. Others, I need it, nervous. This is also very much written off, but it is read what and how. But those, especially the artists, will always claim that they don't know what they're transporting. They're just hired workers. But as often happens, these hired workers, the first or second time, claim that they didn't know what they were transporting. And then they announce, and they become, let's say, on the line. And on this line, they keep working until they get caught or something changes. We had one case where a double bottom was made in a Land Rover. This car was on the line going back and forth several times and no one could find it. This is the double bottom. And this double bottom could hold about 200 kilograms. 200 kilograms of hashish, for example, in this situation. This is to make it clear. A secret button was pressed and with hydraulics, it was rising. Rising. The second bottom was rising. This car was stopped several times at customs in Belarus and Ukraine. The dog was indicating that there was something there. They checked everything at the border and couldn't find anything. Well, she sniffed it out, yeah. The car is coming from Europe, residual smell. So they're coming from Holland. It smells in Holland. Is it possible? It's possible. Everything was done perfectly. Factory seems just like the mats. You can't dig any deeper. We pinpointed the location where this car was traveling from and where it was manufactured. The Spanish colleagues checked. They confirmed the information, and We were informed that in Spain, where, according to our point, there is a special workshop that produces these vehicles. And for everyone this concerns, specifically for the smugglers from any country, you bring them the necessary car and they already manufacture it.
They pinpointed the Spanish workshop in Russia down to the door. Because there are Google Street Views, this method was devised in the 3rd department.
We came up with one method, appeared there at the beginning. In the 2000s, Google Maps, Street View, they were just developing. This technology was evolving. And we started using these travels to countries and regions. And that's how we carefully established the crossing point, the loading place. We meticulously set up this garage where they are manufactured. These kinds of cars are made for smuggling. And accordingly, you already print out these streets, these houses, the coordinates. Everything is provided in detail. In particular, and it's already being sent. In this case, we sent it to Spain for verification of the evidence we had obtained. The Spaniards were very surprised at that time.
Separately, in the drug trafficking system, there were always smugglers from the Baltic states. They were considered virtuosos of their craft and operated independently for a while.
With the Baltics, they were, let's say, progressive smugglers. So they were setting up some companies as intermediaries for purchasing, for example, agricultural machinery or construction equipment used in European countries. They also manufactured this equipment in Europe. Stash spot. They would stash drugs there, and here they would officially clear the equipment through customs. That's why it all seemed legal. All the customs documents and everything else were there. But they hid it so skillfully that it was very hard to find the place where it's hidden. Well, for example, in the excavator's arm, there was an arrest. In the excavator's arm, they stashed more than 860 kilograms. In Belarus, there was an arrest where they stashed a huge amount of drugs in some kind of cedar. They also stashed a huge amount of drugs, so that's their style.
But if you stash in the excavator's arm, it won't work.
They made it so that everything worked. There, whether it was in the cedar or not, everything was spinning around because customs checks everything. They understand perfectly well, too. Everything is packed. Hermetic packaging, so that, God forbid, there would be any smell. If needed, there. With hydraulics, they would pour something to wash it all off. So the excavator's arm was working, all the buttons were functioning. But used equipment might not be great. It works, but it works.
But by the mid-2010s, the Baltic smugglers came under the control of the Bormann gang. Bormann did not interfere in their activities. His conditions were like this. Moldovan smugglers deliver the drugs to the borders of the Baltics, and they receive it already in Russia. How the transportation will be carried out doesn't matter.
It's not always necessary. Like they show in the movies, to shoot, threaten, and all that. It's easier to come to an agreement. It's easier to come to an agreement, especially economically. In the case of the Baltics, they received. They received for their work, let's say, 10% of the transported cargo. Moreover, 10% of the transported cargo accordingly at a price not from Moscow, for example, but at a price from the coast of Spain.
And Bormann could offer them cheaper goods because...
And he certainly offered it because he made a pre-order that for absolutely a year, regardless of any delays, losses, something else, I will push through my trading points. I'll pump it up. Let's say 1,000 kilograms. And those thousands of kilograms are just as profitable for the producer because he understands, for example, that this ton is definitely his this year. This is drug economics. And it operates for the same reasons as the foundations of regular economics.
It is important to note that the fact that Bormann assumed control of the Baltic route had crucial consequences for our story. Now, former clients of the Baltics were supposed to come to him, and among them was a very important person.
During the thorough and detailed investigation into Bormann's case, we heard about some of his extensive network of contacts. And indeed, we heard about a certain Moses as well. I'll be honest, I searched for this Moses for quite a long time indeed. Information was coming out of St. Petersburg that he was there, that he was spotted somewhere, and that he was seen with the name Moses, apparently, from Moscow. That he is somehow related trafficking because the drug is expensive and was mainly sold through various club networks. That's where the more glamorous youth or visitors with more money are. And eventually we got information that youth or visitors who have more money. And eventually we got information that Moses would turn to Bormann to transport a certain amount of drugs, specifically in Russia. Why did he do that? Well, he probably thought so, because at that time, Bormann already had a very extensive and serious logistics network. And isn't it more profitable for him? He initially assumed that he had hired Bormann, but Bormann is a peculiar leader. He just played this Moses for a fool with some Russian words.
According to the investigation, Bormann involved a thug in that transportation who was robbing mansions in Rubliovka. And then he announced that the guy lost a shipment of cocaine.
He decided to just play his game and announced that the robber had lost the drugs and he doesn't owe Moses anything. Moses, accordingly, kept it very secret. He held a grudge about it because he lost about $1 million from that shipment.
Soon after that, Bormann was arrested in Moldova on charges related to the drug business. Now, it was difficult to collect any money from him. But Moses wouldn't be Moses if he didn't find a way.
Bormann was still busy in making counterfeit cigarettes in Spain. And this activity on the territory of Spain was no less profitable for him than the activity on transit. The transit of hashish and later cocaine.
Moses found this factory in Spain and he sent his people to take it over. It was a tough power move in the spirit of Moldovan banks. A hostile takeover, a change of leadership. The factory remained the same. It just started operating for Moses.
We were extremely surprised that neither the approach to cigarette production nor the team changed. So in other words, the director changed, and all the other workers, the foreman, the accountant, they stayed in their jobs for quite some time.
Such a thing couldn't go unanswered. Around that time, Bormann Sr., Pruțianu's brother, was released from prison after a long sentence, and he was used to solving any issues with force. Everyone was waiting for him to go and take the factory for himself first thing.
Surely we would have heard that this fighter is gone, this one. On one side, this fighter is gone, and on the other side, he isn't. They disappeared, just like in the previous stories. They can't be found, and their relatives accordingly are reporting that these people are missing.
But days, weeks, and months went by and nothing happened. The Bormann family didn't fight for the factory that was so brazenly taken from them. It didn't seem like them. The factory was worth about €1 million. That's exactly the amount of money Moses lost in the deal with Bormann when his shipment of cocaine went missing. The investigators concluded that the factory was taken to settle a debt, and Bormann and Moses are settling accounts and possibly back together in business.
I understand that they found a third-party arbitrator and resolved their business dispute, which was initially worth $1 million, let's say, or euros. Why do I come to this conclusion? Because there are no consequences. What would stop them from continuing their work? Criminal collaboration, especially a partnership that brings in daily profits. Logistics plus opportunities for distribution.
On the surface, everything could have looked like it did before. Bormann's subordinates are involved in drug trafficking, while Moses is investing money. But it wasn't that simple.
In this situation, with Moses, Bormann's group was essentially absorbed. Well, in fact, yes, they were on equal footing for a certain period of time. Yes, they used each other to make a profit. Yes, But Moses arranged for you to get a cut from this. You have your own share. You have authority, you have logistics, you have everything. And so gradually Borman was turning into a hired manager. His criminal group was turning into hired managers.
This chain of events led to Moses integrating into the system, just like that. You can't get in with money from the outside.
The drug market is quite narrow. Almost everyone knows each other. That's why a person who has and possesses a certain amount of finances won't just enter this market. In other words, someone has to introduce him. Yeah, the competition there is really tough. Yeah, the rules of the game are very serious there. But Latin American, North American, European, Asian, or our domestic risky financiers, they invest in these incredibly risky operations, such as extremely lucrative financial ventures, because they can yield returns of up to tens or even hundreds of times more profit than regular operations with any other goods.
So Moses got a huge and quick turnover of funds, and the system received an influx of new money. Demand connected with supply, and so from all this, the cocaine route to Cape Verde was born. A mega shipment that could bring in billions. The ship with cocaine commenced its voyage in the early part of January in the year 2019. And in 2018, the Spanish smuggler Alejandro and the Latin American drug supplier known as the Colombian Pope were released from prison. This means that they started making preparations for the record shipment of cocaine immediately after their release.
Such a shipment, based on experience, it takes a certain amount of time. So in this case, it's no less than 6 months. Acquisition of the ship, the loading location, the unloading location, the teams, obtaining the drugs, conducting financial transactions. Naturally, you understand that in this, at least 50, 60 people should be involved in the operation.
It was right at this moment that Moses entered the European drug market. And as investigators believe, he was offered to finance the purchase of this batch.
The most you can do, invest in these 10 tons? Well, maximum $1 million and to make a profit of $2 billion. In my opinion, and according to our Spanish colleagues, they had just found one of the sponsors, and that was Moses. Moses is quite an adult, around 50 plus somewhere, so I can say, so this is it. From the 90s, from the 80s, at that time it was unclear whether it was business or crime. You are in uniform, in crime, or without shoulder straps. You not in crime? Well, the fact that he went down this path, yes, and that he was held criminally accountable. Well, there was such a thing.
The enterprise promised huge profits. 9 tons of pure cocaine bought for pennies. They planned to release it to the most lucrative market, in Europe, and then further into Russia.
They get this drug from the manufacturer, but at most from a criminal group in Latin America for $4 a gram. At the same time, in Europe and especially in Russia, the drug sold in the same club has a relatively low percentage content, around 10-15%, and it already costs $300 per gram. The USA, how much did the price of the drug increase from the manufacturers? By 300 times. What a gigantic walrus from coast to coast across the Atlantic. It increases by tens, and in some cases even by hundreds of times.
The vessel, SR, was bought from a Turkish company for $1 million. The money in this operation is insignificant. The Mexican team brought him to Panama. There's a crew change, and the Russians are taking over. SR goes out to sea without the drugs. They will load it later, but how? Understanding this was aided for the Russian investigators by specialists from the US Drug Enforcement Administration. They provided data on the vessel's movements.
We received data from the vessel's transponder, which sends out its geographical coordinates every 4 hours. It drew attention due to the suspicious maneuvers It slows down, comes to a stop. Although the route is known, the official route, this must be Panama, Morocco. The vessel's movement is marked by delays, unclear stops, and maneuvers.
Such maneuvers in the Caribbean Sea are a big mistake in and of themselves. SR automatically ended up in the system for tracking suspicious vessels. Moses, the anti-drug center of Europe, would have detained him at the first opportunity, and that chance came in Cape Verde. But why was the ship moving like that? Investigators obtained a printout of calls from the ship's satellite phone and compared the data with its movement map. It turned out to be interesting.
We temporarily realized this and saw that there was a satellite phone on the ship. And the captain had been hiding the presence of this phone on the ship from the crew for quite a long time. This is something that many cartel crew members noted as an unusual fact. By overlaying the call information from the phone and its location with the ship's location data, we found a clear match. The strange maneuvers were happening right where the calls were being made. So, a match. A lot of matches related to calls to this satellite phone and from it, and with stops and unclear maneuvers of the ship.
The printouts revealed who they were calling from the satellite phone. It turned out to be Natalia, the drug cartel coordinator. She brought the ship to the point where the drugs were thrown on board.
Let's say, in the version presented by the captain in court, a call comes in on the phone, which says to proceed to a point with specific coordinates. All right, the captain is going. So, without any hesitation, he heads to that point, but he encounters, they're not the same kind of ship and no overload. 3 boats, about the same kind as I mentioned, and another boat with a tank machine gun on the bow. Phone, the captain's satellite phone rings and says, "Do you see the people on the boats? Do you see the machine guns? I see." Well, they want to, those who are on the boats, they want to make money. Do you understand? I understand. And do I have your data? The crew members and your family? So you do what needs to be done. Accordingly, the loading of cocaine takes place. And you can see that, let's say the captain's inner turmoil. That he probably initially thought probably maybe ordinary contraband of goods. And here, drug smuggling is happening. And you can see just by the movement of the ship that he starts to slow down and turn around. It stays in one place for a long time. It's at these points that the calls happen again. Well, I just assume that this is his curator, let's say, putting him on the right path. Everything has already happened. There's no turning back. You go where you're told. So at the level of feelings, you already understand what's happening.
I'll jump in for a moment to the smooth flow of the film. It's fair to give the captain's perspective on what happened. The thing is, I was corresponding with Sergei Kotlovsky when he was already in prison. The captain probably understood that this correspondence could be read not just by him or me. So, according to the captain, the cargo, of unknown origin, was abandoned on board already in open sea, under the threat of retaliation against the crew. The captain also reported that the unloading was supposed to take place at sea, about 180 miles from the port of Tangier in Morocco. Also, according to the captain, the crew had no idea that this voyage would take such a turn. The investigation thinks otherwise. It believes that the sailors should have suspected that this was not a very straightforward voyage. The captain said that at the moment he received those bags on board, he realized he had gotten himself into a very bad situation, but he thought that the threatening messages on his phone would testify in his favor. However, after the arrest, according to the captain, someone deleted those messages, so the court didn't even, I didn't investigate the whole attack by armed men on the ship in open sea responsibility. Thus, it all fell entirely on the crew. It's surprising that long before this, the captain had a sort of vision of how it would all unfold. The investigation even dug this up.
Captain wrote a short novel in fictional narratives, not in a documentary, about a similar incident involving drug trafficking and, let's say, the crew's blind involvement, that the crew didn't know that there were drugs on the ship. The novel, a gripping story, let's say, with a touch of adventure. A person can't just make this up completely, out of nowhere. A person from movies or even from conversations won't highlight something like that. That means some kind of personal experience. The novel was about the fact that there was a drug shipment on the ship in St. Petersburg where the ship was detained and the drugs were discovered. Naturally, there's a share of fiction, a bit of fantasy in this novel, but without a doubt, he was essentially writing himself into the main character, as if something similar had happened to him in reality in the past.
In the summer of 2019, we at RTVI tried to find the organizers of that cocaine shipment through open sources. And we found out that the trail leads to Mexico. Mexico was already the main hub for drug trafficking in Latin America. We found the founding documents of the company that bought the ship for transporting cocaine. The company was founded by 3 Mexicans. One of them, Javier Ortiz, allegedly signed contracts with the sailors. We started digging for information on him and found out that he was a man with connections. He was the Minister of Road Construction in the administration of the Mexican governor, the most corrupt governor in history, who received a long prison sentence, and he was also suspected of having ties to the drug mafia. Judging by social media, the Mexican ship owners had many relatives and acquaintances in Spain, in the land of smugglers, in the cities of Vigo and Pontevedra. There were also connections with shady people from Romania. At that time, we didn't understand how to connect all of this together. We didn't see what was happening further along the eastern part of this route. And the investigation was actually moving in the opposite direction, from Russia and Moldova towards the shores of Spain. Now that these pieces have come together, we can see, 1, complete drug route that connects the western and eastern hemispheres of the earth. When the Murmansk sailors were arrested in Cape Verde, the Spanish drug trafficking organization Natalia and Alejandro began to stir. They urgently headed to Cape Verde not to help the crew.
There was indeed an attempt to come to Cape Verde. There was an attempt to, in some manner, get hold of that ship, apparently. But people probably didn't know yet that everything had indeed already happened. The discovery and seizure of the drugs. So they arrived in Cape Verde, checked things out on the spot, saw that nothing was working out, turned around and vanished into thin air.
Realizing that the drugs had been seized and the sailors arrested, the organizers of the drug shipment started to panic. They probably thought it would be like last time. Sailors questioned, reach top of group, then back to prison.
Natalia and Alejandro are acting quite simply. They are trying to disappear, to vanish in Russia. The business in Spain is shutting down. All traces are being cut off. The move to Russia is happening. There were reports that the remaining accomplices in Spain were complaining about his departure to Russia. They complained about his departure to Russia because he took, let's say, the cash from this operation, the money cash, to Russia. He hid it somewhere.
Everything was complicated by after intercepting such a large shipment of cocaine, someone had to cover the losses.
So we conditionally estimate the amount of drugs at between $5 to $10 million. The purchase of the vessel was $1 million, that is, plus the expenses that have already been incurred, like the flights to the MK Mads. So all of this investment at this stage, we understand that about $15 to $20 million went down the drain, just vanished. As far as I know, Alejandro flew after that. To Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro, as far as I remember. Most likely, these were indeed the reporting meetings before the leadership of the criminal cartel. Who is taking responsibility? Well, since he returned from there and didn't make any moves, there probably weren't any claims against him. Either he convinced people that it wasn't his responsibility, or he said, yes, this is entirely my fault, but I will cover all the expenses. He promised.
The drug mafia was worried for nothing. The court in Cape Verde didn't bother to find out whose cocaine it was. In 2020, the sailors were sentenced to long prison terms, and that was the end of it. Shortly after that, the cartel's courier, Natalia, started making rounds to Russian ports again, though she was avoiding Murmansk. She traveled to Vladivostok and St. Petersburg, probably looking for a crew to transport a new shipment. There was information that the Colombian boss is calling in new investors. True to Moses, he hasn't reached out after that failed shipment. And what do you think the Colombian boss will do now? Perhaps do you think?
I think they're preparing for the next shipment. What else is he supposed to do? He's been doing this his whole life, and he continues to do it.
What was missing? To arrest him, detain him, or bring any charges against him?
As of today, In Spain, as I understand it, law enforcement has no evidence against the Colombian boss and no evidence at all. The DEA in the US, which offers its services everywhere, also apparently has no evidence against any member of the criminal group that operated this route with 9-10 tons of drugs.
In 2020, the investigation identified all the main and secondary participants of that record shipment. But mysteriously, no arrests followed. On the contrary, after several years in prison in Moldova, he was released. Oleg Prutianu. The court still couldn't gather the strength to consider the charges against him. The investigators in Moscow started having problems. They started being checked for various reasons. They hinted to them that they needed to change the direction of the investigation.
If we exceeded a high level of investigation, then the criminal group itself, nationally, which has been in the market for a long time, in the drug market, the criminal market, it has connections not only with businesses, but also with certain officials. When I suggested to Renat to take... I told him the following about the criminal case involving cocaine. Renat, we have this story between us. You understand perfectly that it's 9 to 10 tons. These are not just people who are committing crimes on the street. So this might possibly be our, including the latest case. Will we be able to carry the flag of the standard bearer up the mountain so that to honestly investigate the criminal case and bring everything to light, even including some officials, corrupt ones? He says, I'm ready. I say, if you're ready, then I'm ready too.
In the end, the leaders of the 3rd Department were already being made to understand that the topic of international drug trafficking is not the level that is needed. You're aiming too high.
The leaders stated, your international investigation is not of interest to us. We are the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In response to my objections that cocaine, in most cases, hashish and heroin are not produced within Russia, but come from outside the country, and that someone needs to deal with this, in most cases, without finding any resonance.
Everything came to the point where the department led by Pelek and Kuramshin was disbanded and then reassembled, but without them.
That's the end of the story. The investigation, you could say, is at an end.
No one continues it, no one picks it up, nothing.
It's ongoing. It's dragging on. With the detention of the sailors, it has been, how long has it been? 3 to 4 years. 19th year. 4 years. In 4 years. The results should have at least been voiced in the public space. But aside from the detention of the crew on the ship, there are no detainees at this time.
Since 2020, Russia has been trying to negotiate with Cape Verde to allow the convicted sailors to serve their sentences at home. During this time, one of the sailors died in prison abroad. To bring the sailors home, Russian courts recognized the court's decision in Cape Verde. However, there is still no information about whether any of the crew members have been returned. Sergei Pelek and Renat Kuramshin have been retired since 2021. RTVA sent a request to the investigative department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs about the state of... There is a case about the smuggling of 9 tons of cocaine in Cape Verde. There is no response yet. Every day, the illicit drug trade generates a substantial amount of dirty money. It is from the fight against drug money that financial activities like anti-money laundering, demands for transparency, and so on have emerged. The drug trade is the father of all criminal money.
Now, in everything, there is an excess of money supply and free money in the world. And this, in my opinion, is also partly due to drug trafficking. Because this money, there's nowhere left to put it. You represent the masses. Money that will need to be funneled into the economy, perhaps significant additional...
The attempts to find a place for this black money are visible everywhere. It's hard to make them work. Often, dirty money just sits as cash, not moving.
We've seen, for example, former employees, not really law enforcement agencies, I won't directly name names, but one or the other had between 7 to 10 billion rubles in cash in their apartment. Cash. They were taking out cash in a kamazé. This money, so they were smart enough to earn this money, but they just didn't have enough, the smarts, to put it somewhere. Let it go. They bought apartments, like 20 apartments, 30 cars, went to restaurants, and still there was so much that they just sat in the apartment. Well, there was nowhere to put them.
There's one industry where criminal money flows in like a river. By the way, they managed to make illegal income back in the Soviet times. But this influx of criminal money turns the entire industry into a black hole where any amounts just disappear.
We especially, it's considered promising. This construction is considered what we have here and abroad. Construction is a bottomless barrel for money laundering, especially cash, especially physical money.
Criminal money makes not only individual industries murky, but also government tenders. And here, everything gets mixed up. Draining budget funds, corruption, legalizing criminal income.
Just imagine, one businessman takes money from a bank, and another businessman takes it from the criminal world. It turns out that one businessman pays interest to the bank, and another businessman who has access to criminal money, he still gets it, a share from the legalization of that money. So the difference is very significant in this. And what kind of economic competition can there really be between these businessmen in today's competitive and rapidly evolving market? Of course, a businessman who uses illegally obtained funds from various illegal activities and earns interest from laundering that money, such as money laundering. He has numerous opportunities to negotiate. The opportunities to use that money are much greater than for a businessman who operates legally. This is exactly what is called the undermining of the economy of any country.
The drug economy has already reached a scale where it can significantly influence leading politicians in small countries. There, the money is comparable to national budgets.
I personally brought charges against the leader of the Democratic Party of Moldova, Lopatnikov. Before he became a politician, he first notably took over the entire criminal market and brought all the thieves in law under his control. Athletes to manage ordinary people. This money corrupts people, including politicians. And if we look at it globally, some countries, this is not an isolated example.
The drug mafia is constantly evolving. It expands its connections and establishes logistics. It went through the pandemic perfectly, and it wasn't affected by military actions in Europe. Drug supplies are only increasing. This needs to be stopped. This can only be done through international efforts. What the third department was so good at, criminals of different nationalities and faiths find common ground easily. Countries will have to act together if they do not want to be ruled. The drug mafia.
When the investigation is brought up at the level, and you're looking for leaders of criminal communities who are the curators of these criminal groups, one way or another, you're putting yourself in danger. Well, behind us, truth and law, behind them are huge amounts of money and certain influence over certain individuals. Sometimes we won, sometimes we lost, but in the end, we always move forward. Well, this time will probably be the same.